Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave and this is my daily ruling. Today I'm going to be talking about a very important question debated by Magic players for years. What is the most broken card in Magic? Well, if the title and the thumbnail didn't give it away already, it's not the One Ring or Yawgmoth's Will or even Black Lotus. Nope, my vote for the most broken card is a 1-mana Professor Oak with no drawbacks other than it might cost you your very soul. Well, something like that anyway. To be honest, I can't remember ever seeing anyone actually play for Ante, so it's easy to forget cards like this even exist, let alone how they work. In fact, I'd wager that some of the people watching might not have even known that Ante cards are still supported in the comprehensive rules even today. My original video on this topic was DDR number 666, and it went live on the day that I returned home from Sin City. I'd been wanting to do a refresh on this one for a while, and what better time than now since I'll be returning there at the end of this month for the Magic Con. What do I have to lose? So, first of all, what is Ante? Well, as the name suggests, it's a way of playing for keeps. Yes, that is the official language used to describe it in the CR. If you're playing for Ante, each player antes a random card from their library after deciding who goes first, but before drawing any cards. The Ante zone is a public zone, meaning all cards in it are face up, and so each player will know what cards are in the Ante zone at all times. There's currently no known way to have a face down card in the Ante zone. There are a few cards that can take cards and put them into the Ante zone or take them out. Along with all the other cards that refer to Ante or changing the card's legal owner, these cards all say to remove them from your deck before playing if you're not playing for Ante. In addition to the normal English meaning of this phrase, there's a rule that says cards with this text cannot be brought into the game, for example via a wish or a booster tutor. Cards in the Ante zone still have the same owners during the course of the game. After the game is over, the winner becomes the owner of all the cards in the Ante zone. During or before the game, only a card's owner can ante a card. And that basically sums it up. It's actually not that complicated of a mechanic, probably because it wasn't around for very long. I get the feeling there's a lot of unexplored design space here. But I also get why it wasn't very popular. For starters, it's pretty much completely incompatible with tournament Magic. Even putting aside the obvious legal concerns, there's still the practical matter of what happens if you lose a key card from your deck mid-tournament. Even in a kitchen table setting, it's not hard to see why people would not want to play for Ante. People tend to form strong emotional bonds with their decks and the cards they're in, and the thought of losing part of that during a game is a tough pill to swallow. And that's before the issue that what card gets anteed is completely random. I'm told that some people who played for Ante had a house rule that lands couldn't be anteed, or players could mulligan their own or their opponent's anteed cards. These weren't official though, and the baseline was it would be totally possible to risk your own basic island to potentially win your opponent's Black Lotus. I mean Shivan Dragon. Seriously, who would play Black Lotus? It's just 3 mana. Now the fact is that this turned people off, and it's a little bit ironic that's the case because it was cited in the early rule books as a way for players to fight back against pay-to-win opponents with bigger bankrolls. Yeah, it certainly was a simpler time back then, wasn't it? Now that last point brings up the final issue that sounded the death knell for Ante. You know what the most surefire way to protect your most valuable cards from being anteed was? Just don't play them! Certain deck styles relied only on relatively cheaper or more readily available common cards, and certain optimizations could not be worth the meta risk of losing more valuable cards to ante. So players were indirectly encouraged to play certain strategies and avoid others, which, aside from not being very fun, went against the core of what Magic was trying to do. Ironically, this too was alluded to in the early Magic rulebook. So, now we've gone through how the mechanic works and some of the background behind its rise and fall, let's close out with a couple of fun questions that I came up with involving Ante cards. First up, let's say Amy plays a Rebirth. Does Nick know what card Amy anteed when he's deciding whether to ante one himself? And for the answer to this one, let's refer to this rule here, which says that if multiple players have to make choices or take actions at the same time, the players make any decisions required in app-nap order, and then all take the relevant actions simultaneously. So the correct way to resolve the spell is to go around the table in turn order, starting with the active player, and have everyone say yes or no to the question of whether they want to ante a card. After that, all the players who said yes will move their cards into the ante zone at the same time, and then those players will go to 20 life. This procedure is potentially important to know if you're playing Rebirth with cards that let you look at the top card of your library, or cards that make you play with the top card revealed. Okay, next up, Amy uses Kiki Jiki to make a copy of Tempest Efreet and then activates the ability The Token. What happens? So, unfortunately, the Fun Police are going to step in on Amy here. Activating the token's ability involves sacrificing it, and after that happens, with the ability still on the stack, the token in the graveyard will cease to exist. Given that Nick declines his opportunity to pay 10 life to avoid revealing a random card in his hand, we'll then get to the instruction to exchange ownership of the card with the Tempest Efreet token. Now, anytime you see the word exchange, there's this rule here that says if you cannot complete both parts of the exchange, nothing will happen. Since the token no longer exists, this instruction will not be performed. The rest of the ability will still continue to happen as normal though, except, well, the instruction to put the revealed card in Amy's hand cannot be performed since only a card's owner can put it into their hand. Likewise, the instruction to put Tempest Efreet into Nick's graveyard cannot be performed either. In case you're wondering, this same ruling would apply in the case where a non-token Tempest Efreet was activated, but then moved from the graveyard to a different zone after the activation. This is because changing zones causes the Tempest Efreet to become a new object with no memory or connection to its previous self. Thus, when the game tries to exchange ownership of Tempest Efreet and something else, it can't do that because the specific Tempest Efreet that the game is looking for does not exist anymore. So maybe now you're wondering why it says to put Tempest Efreet from anywhere into Nick's graveyard. Well, if there was, say, a Rest in Peace out while this card was activated, it would end up in the exile zone, having never gone to the graveyard. Now, the game is still able to track Tempest Efreet to the first zone that it goes to, meaning it would be able to find it and put it back into the graveyard. Well, at least it would try to do that, but of course Rest in Peace would just exile it again. Interestingly, the game can only track the card this way if it goes to a public zone. So if it was a Wheel of Sun and Moon rather than Rest in Peace, the game would not be able to find Tempest Efreet, and we would have the same answer as if we put it into the graveyard and then moved it somewhere else. No exchange can happen. Okay, next question. Amy steals Nick's Jeweled Bird and then activates it. What happens? Well, so with this, we'll follow the instructions in the order that they're written. And right away, we see that there's a problem. The first step in the resolution of this ability is to ante Jeweled Bird, but that cannot happen because only a card's owner can ante it. Jeweled Bird is worded such that the rest of the stuff in its ability is contingent on anteing it, so that stuff doesn't happen either. The Jeweled Bird will just stay on the battlefield and absolutely nothing will happen as the ability resolves. This would also be the case if the Jeweled Bird couldn't be anteed for some other reason, such as because it had changed zones before its ability resolved, similar to the Tempest Efreet scenario. Unlike that last one though, there's absolutely no problem with anteing an artifact token. So if you can find a way to make a Jeweled Bird token, you can rescue all of your cards from the ante zone and spend the rest of the game with nothing to lose. Next, let's say that we activate Amulet of Quaz in a 4-player game. What happens? Okay, well, first of all, yes, there is an actual card that ends the game with a literal coin flip. You know, sometimes I wish judges could have that card. But anyway, with the modern wording of this card, the answer becomes pretty obvious. The flip happens, and then after that, one player loses. And the game just continues with 3 players, just as if that player lost via a door to nothingness or something. Easy. And speaking of easy, let's close things out with a couple of quick hits about how ante interacts with some other corner cases. First up, how do wish effects play with ante? Well, we already said that you cannot use a wish to bring an ante card into a game that is not an ante game, so that would not work. Also, the anteed cards are in the ante zone. Now, that's a zone just like anything else, like the battlefield or the exile zone, and that means that anteed cards are not considered outside the game, and so they cannot be brought back into the game via one of these either. So there's not a lot of interaction here to speak of. I think another thing that's probably on a lot of people's minds is what would happen if an ante game ends up as a draw. And that's pretty straightforward. After an ante game, the winner becomes the owner of all the cards in the ante zone. If there's no winner, that part just doesn't happen. So all the cards would stay with their original owners. Well, what if we restart the game, like with Karn Liberated? And if you restart the game, no players win, lose, or draw the restarted game. So the cards in the ante zone would not change owners, and they'll be shuffled into their owners' libraries, just like all the other cards from the game. A restarted ante game would probably still be played for ante, so the players would ante a new card as part of the process of restarting the game. And interestingly, any cards left in exile with Karn would not be eligible to be anteed since they're not part of the library when the game is started. Now finally, what about Magic subgames? Okay, so unlike restarting the game, when you start a subgame, you leave all the cards from the main game where they are, including all the ones that are in the ante zone. At the end of the subgame, all the cards from the subgame are shuffled into their respective owners' main game libraries. Now interestingly, at the end of the game is also when ante cards change ownership. I could not find any official source for what order those two events happen in, but fortunately the point is moot. The subgame does not have an ante even if the main game does. And this rule isn't spelled out in the CR, nor in the current Oracle text of Shahrazad, but the printed text on this card does specify it, and my colleagues who have been in the game longer than I have tell me that is indeed how it was handled. Now, since all the ante cards include the sentence, remove this card from your deck before playing if you're not playing for ante, well, my reading is that all such cards would be removed from your subgame library before starting the subgame. This ruling especially makes sense in light of the remainder of the last sentence on Shahrazad's printed text, which says that using less than 40 cards may be necessary. Recall that at the time Shahrazad was printed, this was the minimum deck size for both limited and constructed games. It's a bit ambiguous where the cards would go, though. A strict reading would indicate that the ante cards would go from the main game library to the subgame library and then get removed. Would that mean they go to the subgame exile zone, or maybe they just get removed from both games? It's hard to say. I feel like the most reasonable interpretation, though, would be that those cards would be removed from the thing that will become your subgame library before the subgame starts, meaning that they would never enter the subgame and remain in your main game library, being shuffled in with the rest of your subgame cards once the subgame concludes. But I admit the rules as written don't do a great job spelling this one out. Maybe I need to bug the rules manager about this on Twitter. Phew. Well, that was a lot, but now you should know everything you need to know about ante. And honestly, I don't really see a lot of hope for ante ever making a comeback to relevancy the way phasing or some of the other old mechanics did, but I think it is fun to talk about stuff like this for purely academic purposes, especially on a special occasion like this one. And I couldn't close the ante episode out without giving a special shout out to my personal pick for the best ante card. Now, I know I already said Contract was the most broken, but for my money, Bronze Tablet is the best. And that's because in Chandalar, which, let's face it, is probably the only place that these cards are seeing play nowadays, the computer is programmed to never concede or pay 10 life for any of the ante cards. And it also would not make plays that would be obvious for a human, such as sacrificing Black Lotus for 3 mana in response to the ability in order to save it. Now, all this is to say that Bronze Tablet basically reads 4 tap, exile target permanent, and add it to your collection, which I don't think I have to tell you how much that could progress your account. Next time you're at a Nomad's Bazaar, make sure you stock up. You'll be glad you did. Now here's one last tip if you want to play Bronze Tablet in a contemporary setting with current rules and text. Note its Oracle text does not use the word exchange like Tempest of Freets does. Exiling Bronze Tablet also appears after the colon in the ability, meaning that this is not part of the activation cost, but rather one of the effects that happens as the ability resolves. If you sacrifice or otherwise remove Bronze Tablet before that, the rest of the effects, including exiling your opponent's card and them needing to pay 10 life to stay being that card's owner, those will all happen entirely normally, but without you needing to give up ownership of Bronze Tablet. Better yet, Bronze Tablet is immune to this trick happening in reverse. If the targeted permanent leaves the battlefield before this ability resolves, well, the ability will be removed from the stack and none of its effects will happen. Bronze Tablet will stay on the battlefield, ready to try again next turn. Talk about broken, am I right? But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. But until then, I hope you have a great day.